Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt Show, Tim Kasser, who is a professor of psychology at Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois. And he's the author of a fascinating book called The High Price of Materialism. Tell me something, Tim. Is materialism really costly?
Well, all the evidence thus far suggests that it is. I mean, what the research body of literature has shown over dozens and dozens of studies now is that the more that people buy into the messages of consumer culture and the more that they believe that what's really important in life is to make a lot of money and have a lot of possessions, there are a variety of different costs that are associated with that. The first cost is well-being. We know that the more that people endorse those materialistic values, the less happy they are, the less satisfied they are with their lives, the more depressed and anxious they are, and even the more physical ailments they report, like headaches and stomach aches. But it doesn't just end there. It's also the case that the more people endorse materialistic values, the more that they treat other people in ways that are not so hot, that are not so good for other people's well-being. So we know that materialistic people are more selfish, they're more narcissistic, they're more likely to manipulate other people for their own ends, more competitive instead of cooperative, things like that.
So isn't one of the problems, let's dive into this a little bit more. One of the problems is going to be that people, let's say like me, in my day job, I'm a financial advisor. And on the outside, I think that people think that my job is to help you get rich, right? To help someone become rich, which isn't really true, I think.
Sure.
Not that I'm against it, but it seems to me as though the goal that everyone has is that they do want to have more stuff. And I would think, based on your research, that after a while, wouldn't people actually begin to realize themselves, wait a second, having money isn't the be-all and end-all, and they wouldn't stop coming to guys like me to make them rich. They might come to guys like me for what I really try to do, which is help them achieve their long-term goals.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly some people do come to that realization. So there's a group of people who are known as downshifters or voluntary simplifiers. And if you look at that literature, what you see is that there's a good chunk of people who are kind of going along with the standard life, oftentimes trying to become rich, working 60 hours a week, living in big houses and having big TVs and lots of cars. And then they wake up one day and they realize, this is killing my soul. This is, sapping my life of energy. It's ruining my relationship with my family, my health, or whatever. And then people like that tend to downshift and decide that they're going to live a life that isn't focused on working and spending all of the time. But that's a fairly small percentage of the population. Like maybe the evidence suggests at most maybe 20%, 25% of the population. Most people are so influenced by the messages they receive in consumer culture from the media, from business, from governments, from the people around them, that they end up sticking on this life cycle. They stick on this cycle of thinking, well, I just didn't buy the right thing that'll make me happy yet. Or, okay, I'm worth $1 million, but that's not enough. I guess I need to be worth 2 million or 3 million or whatever it is. And that's a belief system which is very much encouraged by modern day consumer capitalism because it keeps the wheels of the economy rolling.
Well, how can we identify someone who is either lazy versus someone who has a healthy view on materialism?
Well, what do you mean by lazy? Tell me more what you mean by that.
I'm glad not to pick on anyone, but a lot of times I find I speak to people and they seem unmotivated. And I'm an entrepreneur. I've started a few businesses and I'm proud of what I've done. And sometimes I'll look at other people and they just seem so not interested. And it's not that they would say, well, Doug, what do you think? It's all about money? And the answer is no. I just think it's nice to build things. But they say, well, I'd like to, I have a very healthy view about money. I'm not looking to make a lot of it. I don't need a lot of things. And I think that this is just an excuse because they're lazy and they're waiting for their parents to die so they can collect the inheritance.
Well, I have no doubt that there are people like that. I'm sure that that's the case. I would say a few things. I think the first thing is that people's attitude towards what enough is varies a lot. There are some people who feel like they never have enough challenges, enough money, a big enough house, whatever it is. And so sometimes that does indeed drive them when they don't feel like they have enough, and I think that's when we see that materialism is especially problematic. I hear what you're saying about, this entrepreneurial desire, and that probably, from the sounds of what you're saying, really provides you with a sense of achievement. It provides you with a sense of challenge. It provides you with perhaps even a sense of legacy, this sense that you've contributed something. And while I recognize that building a business is one way to do that, there are lots of ways to do that. As a scientist myself, I basically never get paid for any of the papers that I write. But I feel that sense of challenge and interest. Or I think about people in nonprofit worlds who also are trying to build something. They're certainly not lazy, but they're oriented towards building something that isn't about financial profit.
I hear. So you're saying that there are simply different ways that people look at it. We're talking to Tim Kasser, who is a professor of psychology, and he studies materialism. He's been talking to us about how when people are more materialistic, they'll often become more unhappy and ultimately even treat others badly because they're so focused on getting more and more stuff. Is being materialistic, Tim, always a bad thing?
Well, it depends what perspective you look at it from. Okay, so from the point of view of well-being, I would say that the evidence is that it's usually bad. It's bad for people's personal well-being, their physical well-being, their social relationships. It tends to be bad for the way that they treat the world in terms of the environment. It tends to be also bad for their financial behavior. Actually, there's a good deal of research showing that more materialistic people take on more debt. And also have worse money management skills, which as a financial advisor, I'm sure you'd be interested in.
Certainly, I've witnessed that. That's true.
Yeah. But from the point of view of consumer capitalism, it's pretty good to be materialistic, because the more that you keep people believing that happiness in life and a meaningful life comes from making a lot of money and having a lot of possessions, that's what keeps the wheels of the economy rolling. And in nations like ours, about 60 to 70% of gross domestic product is usually based on consumer spending, and politicians' future rises and falls on economic growth. So from that viewpoint, materialism is a fine thing for people to pursue and a necessary thing for them to pursue.
So let's bring this down to a personal finance level. A lot of times I've found in families that the parents or grandparents might be rather frugal, and they're really not materialistic, and their kids rebel and they want everything, and they want it now. Do you have a theory on why some families are like this, and maybe how we could educate our kids to be a little bit more under control?
Sure. Well, there's been a number of different studies about the kinds of parental and family features which lead people to end up focusing on materialism. And, the first one's pretty obvious. The more that the parents model that making a lot of money and having a lot of possessions is important, the more children tend to believe that. And so if those frugal parents, you can be a frugal person who is not really focused on making a lot of money, or you can be a frugal person who is focused on having a lot of money. And so if you're a frugal person of that sort of second sort, then that's going to send your kids a message that it's really important to make a lot of money. That's the first thing. The second thing we know from the research is that the more that parents are kind of colder instead of warm and kind of controlling and domineering, then the kids end up feeling sort of more psychologically insecure, and they look around and they're thinking, well, I don't want to feel insecure. How do I solve my problem? Consumer society comes in and says, oh, I feel insecure. Well, you don't have the right clothes, you don't have the right car, you don't have the right whatever, go buy something.
Well, that's about buying. So you're saying that they buy things, but what about the fact that by having money, if someone, let's say, has $100 in the bank, or he has $1 million in the bank, wouldn't he feel a lot more secure with having more money?
Certainly would. And we also know from the data that it's poor people who tend to be more materialistic than wealthier people. It may not look that way because wealthier people have more means to spend something, but the research over and over shows that it's the same thing as kind of having a cold and controlling parent, that insecurity tends to drive materialistic behaviors. We've shown similar effects with thinking about death, which for many people is quite insecurity provoking. And the research shows over and over again that forcing people to think about their own death as opposed to something unpleasant like dental pain, thinking about your own death increases your materialism too. So my sense is that a poor person tends to feel insecure. That drives them towards materialistic behavior. But even a wealthy person, if they don't feel like they have enough, if they feel like they're not enough of a good person, if they don't feel loved, whatever, they're still going to end up behaving in pretty materialistic ways.
So let's wrap up with the final question about advice to parents when you see your kid moving along the materialistic track and you want to bring them back to the path of light. What would you suggest?
Well, actually, about a year ago, we published the first study which has intervened. We did a random study where we randomly assigned kids to either get a 6-hour intervention, these were all adolescents, with their parents, or to be in a no treatment control group. And we followed those kids' materialism for 9 months after the study ended. And we found that even 9 months later, children who had gotten the intervention had significantly lower materialism scores than the kids who didn't get the intervention. So the first thing I would say is it's
what was the
possible.
intervention? Just so what did it look like?
Well, what the intervention was, it was based on a financial planner's project called the Share, Save, Spend project. Nathan Dungan is his name. And if people Google Nathan Dungan or Share, Save, Spend, they can see more about the intervention that we used. Essentially, what it involved was multiple kinds of interventions. So we spent a lot of time talking about the difference between needs and wants in one's financial behavior. We talked a lot about the need to have a financial plan, because if you don't have a plan, then you'll be buffeted around by all the messages of consumer society, which are always going to tell you to spend rather than to share and to save. We talked a lot about how advertisements and television are all designed in order to make you hungry for more and more consumption. We talked about allowances. And the last thing we talked about that I think was really important was about how to talk with your kids about money in a healthy way. How to talk about savings, how to talk about your taxes, how to talk about saving for college or saving for a car. I think a lot of times families don't ever have those conversations. Parents don't talk to their kids about money other than to say, well, we don't have enough, for you. But if you educate kids about money, then they can learn that, wow, if I spend it all, then that's going to cause problems down the line. So all of these things together were part of the intervention. And again, it succeeded in leading people, these adolescents, to have lower materialism still 9 months after the intervention ended.
We are just about out of time, but in the last few seconds, Tim, tell us, how can people follow you and follow your work?
Well, if you hop onto a search engine and you type in my name, Tim Kasser with a K, you'll find my personal website. If you go to YouTube, you can find a 5-minute animated video that I made with the Center for a New American Dream that is a really good, quick overview of the materialism research and of some solutions. So that would be the two main things I'd point you to.
Okay, that's great. And we will put a link to that at the show notes of today's show on the Goldstein on Gelt website. Tim Kasser, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world. If you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.